Hi there, so this video is to assist you with the essay for the anthropology of India. So there's some advice here that's more general in terms of essay writing and so on, which you'll see repeated in videos on some of the other modules I teach, but also some advice that's more specific to the anthropology of India and the type of question that we're asking you to do here. Okay, so first of all, let's have a look at the basics. When is this due? Well, you need to have this completed by week 12, Friday, 1 p.m. Okay, so make sure you're pacing yourself in terms of the deadlines. You may have different deadlines at slightly different times, or you may have some that come together even on the same day. So you need to plan your time carefully there. Think about how and when you're going to complete these essays. Okay, let's have a look though at what we're asking for. So it's a 2,000 word essay. That's not a particularly long essay, but it's a reasonable enough length, to really sort of develop an argument and to develop some ideas. And you need to here develop or put together what I've called composite essay question in order to develop, your own essay question really. So it's a question that's sort of fixed in terms of the formula that we use, but you've got some wriggle room within it to sort of bring together a question that interests you. And in terms of the composite question then, what I'm really trying to do is to get you to think across an intersection. So you'll notice that I've asked you, if you look down the Moodle page below this video, just down there, you'll see there's a word cloud with a series of words in it. And you need to pick out two of those words. And I'm wanting you to work across that intersection then, in terms of thinking, well, if we put together, say, for example, sexuality and the state, or kinship and gender, or marginality and class, or whatever it might be, caste and labour, and so on and so on. Well, what does that, what does a discussion of that intersection look like? So you really need to focus on the relationship between those two things. In other words, what I don't really want to see is an essay that says, caste in India is understood in these terms, and marginality, say, in India is understood in these terms. Well, no, that's separating those two. What you need to do here is bring the two together and make the intersection of those two things your focus. So if you're doing caste and labour, for example, well then how do caste and labour intersect in India? How does ideas of caste feed into work and labour? How does that affect, for example, labour in different industries? And you'll have some ethnographic material, of course, available to you that will help you with that. But do sort of further reading and further research of your own as well. That's the key to unlocking the door here. That's really what I'm looking for. An essay that's just sort of given me a two-part, sort of discussion of both isn't going to get a particularly good grade here. So we're asking you to do something really a little bit further to push your thinking. Now, this is a second year module, so this is moving away from that stage of, well, here's a very fixed, set essay question to a level where we're asking you to take a little bit more control over that process, right, to give you quite a lot of flexibility. So actually, when you look at it, there's a lot of different combinations that you could put together here to form your question. So as you'll see, again, below me on Moodle, there's some quite detailed instructions just below the word cloud on how to construct that question. I'll read that to you here as well. So to set the question from the selection, you need to insert your chosen intersection, so those two words, into the question. And the question you've got here is, through focusing primarily on ethnographic examples, but also drawing on other contextual material, critically discuss the intersection, there's that key word, yeah, that's what I'm asking you to do, is to look at the intersection, not one and then the other, but the intersection between, insert any two words from the word cloud here, relating to the Indian context. So if you would take two words, let's say again, maybe you take caste and labour, for example, then your question would read, through focusing primarily on ethnographic examples, but also drawing on other contextual material, critically discuss the intersection between caste and labour relating to the Indian context. Okay, and if you had picked sexuality and intimacy, then you might say, through focusing primarily on ethnographic examples, but also drawing on other contextual material, critically discuss the intersection between sexuality and intimacy relating to the Indian context. So again, it's all about focusing on that intersection. I know I keep saying that, but it's so important The area where you're going to fall down here are students who give me a essay that's really sort of delivered in two parts and doesn't bring those two together. Make that your focus right from the start, right? I don't even want to see a discussion of caste in India in general terms, then labour in India in general terms. Right from the beginning, caste and labour, if that's your intersection. Youth and the state, if that's your intersection, yeah? Focus on that intersection. Unpack that intersection. This essay will explore the intersection between, right? That's where you're kind of starting. Okay, let's then move on to thinking about the structure of the essay a little bit more. And what I'd ask you to do here to begin with is to scroll down a little bit from the word cloud. You'll see, first of all, a little bit of information about the essay generally, and you'll also see a link there to the Harvard referencing system. Even if you think you know how to reference properly, just make sure you have another look at that. You're still at fairly early stages. It's not 100% familiar to you. You do get very heavily penalised if you're consistently not using the referencing system accurately. You'll also see I've inserted a bold, underlined request here. It is important to ensure that your essay has an argument. Okay, now for those of you who are also sitting social anthropology theory, you'll see I've made this point also in the social anthropology theory module with regards to the essay. It is critical that your essay has an argument. What do we mean by an argument? Right, okay, well, first of all, let's start with the basics. If your essay begins, this essay discusses the intersection between marginality and the urban in India, then you're in for a problem, because you're not actually telling us what the essay is going to argue. You're just telling us what it's going to discuss, right? We want more than a discussion. We want an argument. So you need to put something together there that looks more like an argument. Okay, now I'm going to have to take it a little bit out of context here, because what I don't want to do is present to you an argument for one of these intersections, because that's for you to develop yourself. So let's take this to a slightly different sort of context. And let's say we imagine for a moment that we're doing a module on kinship, okay? A kinship module. And you've been asked a similar question on kinship. And you've got some words in a word cloud, and you've chosen, let's say, ritual and childhood, right? Or adolescence, let's say, ritual and adolescence as your intersection. So, pretending here, of course, that this is a kinship module, then your question would read, through focusing primarily on ethnographic examples, but also drawn on other contextual material, critically discuss the intersection between ritual and adolescence relating to whatever context, the context of kinship in anthropology, or however that module is framing itself. Okay. So let's say that's your question. Now, again, if you begin the essay with something quite vague, like this essay discusses the intersection between ritual and adolescence, well then, you know, you're not framing an argument. An argument might look, for example, something more like, and it will always start with a line that opens something like, this essay argues, or this essay illustrates, or this essay contends, wording of that sort of nature. So you might say, this essay focuses on the intersection between ritual and kinship. In so doing, the essay argues, very key, that ritual is a key component. Sorry, I said kinship meant adolescence. Is a key component in navigating the gap between adolescence and adulthood. Right? Now you've done something more. Right now you've framed an argument, and then what you're going to do is you're going to spend that essay supporting that argument, right? So you've set it up at the beginning, and now for the essay you're going to be working through the evidence to support that argument. You said, look, you know, I've read the material, this is what I'm going to contend, and now I'm going to show you why. And of course, in this case, what you need to do is you need to show us why with ethnography, and that's so important. Those descriptive examples, you've got many of them amongst the core readings. But please, also, if you want to do well, if you want to get a first, for example, then you need to show evidence of substantial further reading. That's a key criteria, right, for a first-class grade. Showing evidence of substantial further reading. So we need to see a lot more there beyond just that sort of core material. use ethnography as your primary source, right? Absolutely use ethnography as your primary source. So-and-so, let's say Victor Turner shows us in his ethnography of rites of passage amongst young adolescents transition into adulthood, the significance of ritual, and he does it in this particular community, in this particular place, and he describes it in this particular way, right? That's what we need to see in terms of the ethnography. Now, that's part of the question you've got here. So it says, through focusing primarily on ethnographic examples, but then you do have a but also drawing on other contextual material, critically discuss the intersection between X and Y. Okay, so let's return to our sort of kinship module, our imagined kinship module kind of example here. Well, again here, if you were to draw not just on ethnographic material, but also on other contextual material, what might you be thinking about there? Well, for example, you might be thinking about a more historical analysis. So, you know, if you're thinking about caste in India, or kinship rituals and the ways they change over time, or whatever it might be, or a particular place, say, you know, you say you're focusing on a case study of ritual and adolescence amongst Senegalese nomads, let's say, for example. Well, then you need to give a little bit of context there. Who are these nomads? Where are they from? What's their sort of history? What's the history of that community? So that's going to take you perhaps into other literature beyond anthropology, but it's giving context. It's deepening that piece. It's giving it more, right? It's making it actually in the process, in fact, more ethnographic, because you're historicizing your ethnographic piece. And don't feel that you have to limit your engagement to ethnographic pieces alone. They should form the core of things, but you may also find useful material from geography, from sociology, from other disciplines as well, that help you to put that in context. So, you know, maybe you're talking about economy, for example. Well, in that sense, then you might want to think a little bit about the ways in which the Indian economy has changed and is changing. And that might draw you not just to historical literature, but also to a more sort of economic geography, economics, economy sort of literature as well. Just be a bit careful there to remember that this essay is, of course, for an anthropology module. So it must be anthropological. Don't get completely sidetracked. If you write an essay just drawing on, say, economics text, well, then you're going to be having a problem because you're not engaging with the module material. Okay. So that's what I want you to do in terms of this essay. Let's just pull down a little bit further then. If you scroll down a little bit further, you'll see below my statement about an argument that there is the assessment criteria. And here then is really, you know, the criteria that I've got in front of me when I'm marking your piece. So do have a good look at this and think to yourself, you know, where am I positioning myself? Where's my essay sort of falling within this criteria? If I was the marker, if I was in Tom's shoes and I was reading this essay, how would I think about it in that particular way? So first of all, we've got first category here, factual knowledge. Well, you can see here, this is really about accuracy. And that accuracy comes out of careful readings of the text. So if you're misinterpreting a text, or if you are misciting a particular series of events, you know, you're locating it in the wrong place or the wrong time, well, these are inaccuracies. And the more those build up, the more you're falling down that kind of category, right? And hopefully none of you fall, you know, down into that sort of minimal, many major errors and omissions, which would result in a failed piece, of course. So do be careful that you're being consistently accurate and comprehensive there. Be aware of scholarly opinions, the different debates that are playing out within the pieces, and the way these, you know, the literature that you're sort of dealing with fits together. That's really sort of about building that sort of discourse academically amongst the scholarly pieces and showing that you understand, you know, the different sort of opinions and perspectives that are there. But then also making sure you have an argument, right? So it's not like an A-level essay where you might say 50% of people say this, 50% say that, and in the conclusion maybe you sort of suggest a resolution to it or take a position yourself. Take that position right at the beginning and argue that through the evidence. But you do, of course, need to show an awareness, you know, of the broader debates there as well, because that in itself strengthens your own argument. Structure, so this is really thinking about how you structure the piece. It must have an introduction, it must have a main body, it must have a conclusion. These are sort of fairly basic things, but it must also be fluently written, it must be logical, it has to be sort of intelligent, it has to link together and be coherent. So those are the sorts of things we're concerned with there. Critical judgments, that you're able to critique and reflect on pieces, that you're able to, you know, sort of take a critical position. And again, that very much feeds in to this idea of having an argument. Presentation. here we're sort of concerned with how the piece is sort of put together. We're concerned with spelling and grammar. We're concerned with those areas. So do make sure that's accurate as well. And then the final area, referencing. Again, I keep emphasizing this. I know I bang on about it a lot, but it is so important. And you get students who write excellent essays, but lose really quite a lot of marks because they're not referencing properly. A poorly referenced piece, by the way, cannot get more than 59% no matter how good it is, right? So it could be a first class in every other regard. If it's not properly referenced, not going to get a first. In fact, it's not even going to get a 2-1. So really be conscious of the significance of referencing. Okay, so I hope that helps, and I hope that helps you to sort of think things through a bit and bring things together, and to sort of reflect on beginning to develop your own composite essay question. Enjoy the process. This is sort of a little step forward from last year, and it's also preparing you by giving you a little bit more sort of freedom within the essay. It's also preparing you for next year when, of course, you'll have a dissertation, which will be a large-scale piece of your own research. So we're already thinking forwards towards that. And where in some modules you'll have to actually write your own essay question from scratch, right? You won't be given a sort of composite to forge that. You'll have to actually write it in a coherent way from scratch. So again, it's sort of helping you to bridge that gap, right, between the two. We're a little bit sort of working forward as well as thinking about just this module in totality. I hope you get the best out of it. Do enjoy the process. Do give yourself sufficient time, and I wish you the best of luck.